A 2-year-old boy was thrown out of a grocery store for looking suspicious. He was just trying to buy bread for his sick mother. As people stood by in silence, one man stepped forward. Keanu Reeves. What he said next didn't just change that boy's day. It changed the entire city. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun hung low over Los Angeles, casting a warm orange glow across cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts. It was the kind of afternoon where people moved slowly, lost in their routines. Inside a small neighborhood grocery store, the hum of a refrigerator filled the air, and the faint sound of a radio played an old Motown song. Near the entrance, a boy no older than 12 stood still for a moment, trying to gather courage before walking in. His name was Malik Johnson. His hoodie was faded, 2 sizes too big. His sneakers were worn, their soles thinning at the edges. He clutched 3 wrinkled dollar bills in one hand, and a small list written in his mother's handwriting in the other. The list was short: bread, milk, and soup. It was all she could eat since she'd gotten sick. As Malik stepped inside, the store's air conditioning sent a chill through his thin jacket. He looked around shyly, scanning the aisles as if he didn't want to disturb anyone. A few shoppers passed him by, their carts squeaking softly. Near the back of the store, a tall man with a shaved head stood watching him. His black uniform bore a silver badge that read, "Rick, the store's security guard." Rick crossed his arms and squinted. Malik felt the weight of that gaze instantly, the kind that said, "I'm watching you." Malik tried to focus on his task. He went to the bread aisle, picked up the cheapest loaf, and checked the price tag carefully. He counted the bills in his hand again, just to be sure. Then he headed toward the milk section, glancing up once more. Rick was still staring. When Malik reached the counter, he noticed the cashier busy chatting with another employee. He waited patiently, shifting from one foot to the other. But before he could place the bread on the counter, Rick approached. "What are you doing here?" the guard asked in a flat voice. Malik blinked. "I'm just buying this for my mom." Rick's eyes narrowed. "You've been walking around too long, looking suspicious. Let me see what's in your pockets." Malik froze. "I don't have anything," he said softly. Rick didn't listen. He reached forward, grabbing Malik by the arm. The boy's small body tensed. "You're not stealing in this store," Rick growled, pulling him toward the door. The bread slipped from Malik's hands and hit the floor. People stopped and stared, but no one said a word. One woman whispered something to her husband, who shook his head and turned away. Another shopper looked at Malik, then at Rick, and quickly moved to another aisle. Outside, the noise of the street grew louder. Rick pushed open the door and dragged the boy out. Malik stumbled, trying to catch his balance. "I didn't do anything," he cried, his voice cracking with fear. Rick pointed toward the sidewalk. "Then stay out. We don't need troublemakers like you." The glass door closed behind them with a heavy thud that seemed to echo louder than it should. Malik stood frozen on the sidewalk, the wind brushing against his hoodie. His hands trembled as he tried to pull his sleeve over his wrist, where Rick's grip had left a red mark. The bread lay just inside the doorway, forgotten. Pedestrians walked past, glancing but not stopping. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to see. The sound of car horns and city chatter filled the silence that surrounded the boy. His lips quivered as he whispered to himself, "I just wanted bread." Rick remained inside, watching through the glass, one hand resting on his belt. He muttered to another employee, "You can't be too careful these days." The other worker just nodded awkwardly. But even he knew the guard had gone too far. Across the street, at a small outdoor cafe, Keanu Reeves sat quietly with a cup of coffee and a paperback novel. His hair was pulled back, sunglasses resting low on his nose. He had come to this neighborhood after visiting a local youth center, looking for a few moments of peace before heading home. When he looked up, his calm expression faded. He saw the young boy outside the store, shoulders shaking, eyes glistening with tears. Keanu noticed the guard still watching from inside and sensed something deeply wrong. His instincts, the same ones that guided him through years of playing heroes on screen, told him this was real. Malik turned slightly, his face catching the light. Keanu could see the mixture of fear and humiliation there, a kind of pain that went beyond the moment. It was the pain of being treated as guilty before being seen as human. Rick stepped outside again, his tone colder now. "I told you to leave. Go home before I call the cops." Malik's voice was barely audible. "But I didn't steal anything." Rick crossed his arms. "That's what they all say." The phrase hit Keanu like a slap. He stood up slowly, placing a few bills on the cafe table. As he walked across the street, he watched the boy lower his head, as though trying to shrink from the world's judgment. A few people nearby began to take out their phones, curious about the tension. The city's hum softened as Keanu approached, every step deliberate. Malik looked up, confused, when the stranger stopped beside him. "You okay, kid?" Keanu asked, gently. Malik hesitated, then shook his head. "I just wanted to buy bread for my mom. She's sick. I had the money." His voice broke. "He wouldn't let me." Keanu glanced toward the store. Rick stood stiffly, realizing who was now standing in front of him. Recognition flickered across his face, and with it, defensiveness. "This isn't your concern, sir," Rick said, straightening his uniform. Keanu's tone was calm but sharp. "It is now." The air around them thickened with tension. The onlookers who had once turned away now paused, sensing that something important was unfolding. Keanu stood between Malik and Rick, his quiet composure contrasting with the guard's defensive stance. "Tell me what happened," Keanu said evenly. His voice was low but carried authority. Rick folded his arms, trying to sound firm. "The kid was hanging around the aisles, looking suspicious. We've had problems before. I was just doing my job." Keanu turned slightly toward Malik. "Did you take anything?" Malik shook his head, clutching the wrinkled bills in his small hand. "No, sir. I was going to buy bread for my mom. She's sick, and I didn't have much money, so I was checking prices." The simplicity of the boy's words hung in the air, disarming. Keanu looked back at Rick. Then he was a customer, not a suspect. Rick shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it. I just have to keep an eye out. You never know." Keanu interrupted softly but firmly. "You never know what? What a 12-year-old child might do? Or what someone who looks like him might do?" Rick's jaw tightened. He had no answer. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Inside the store, a few customers watched through the windows. One woman whispered to another, "That's Keanu Reeves." But even beyond his fame, there was something about his presence, not loud or confrontational, but deeply human, steady, and undeniable. Keanu crouched slightly to meet Malik's eye level. "You brought money to pay, didn't you?" Malik nodded again, his fingers trembling as he showed the crumpled bills. "Then you did everything right," Keanu said. His tone was gentle now, but everyone could hear the conviction in his words. "You didn't deserve to be treated like that." Rick exhaled, his voice softening. "I made a mistake." Keanu stood upright, his calm gaze unwavering. Fear is a dangerous thing when it decides who we think belongs. If you're afraid of a kid because of his skin color, maybe this isn't the job for you. A hush fell over the small crowd. A few people began to nod quietly, as though they'd all been waiting for someone to finally say it. Keanu turned to Malik. "Come on, let's go back inside." Rick stepped aside, uncertain now, guilt flickering across his face. Malik followed Keanu slowly, still holding the bills. The cashier, who had seen everything, stood silently as Keanu and Malik walked back to the bread aisle together. Keanu picked up the fallen loaf, brushed off the plastic, and placed it gently on the counter. "Let's get this for your mom," he said. Malik's voice was small. "Thank you." Outside, the city kept moving, cars passing, phones buzzing, life continuing, but inside that small store, something had shifted. For one frightened boy, for one uneasy guard, and for everyone watching, a simple act of courage had just reminded them what decency looked like. Keanu stood in the middle of the small grocery store, his presence commanding attention without a word. The hum of the refrigerators faded into the background. All eyes were on him, Malik and Rick. For a long moment, no one moved. Keanu's gaze remained steady, calm, but unyielding. He asked, quietly, "What happened here?" Rick adjusted his belt, his posture stiffening as recognition spread across his face. "Mr. Reeves," he said, forcing a smile. "Didn't expect to see you here. I was just doing my job." The kid looked suspicious. "We've had shoplifters before." Keanu didn't respond right away. His silence was heavier than any argument. When he finally spoke, his tone was even, almost gentle, but it carried an unmistakable edge. "You mean kids who look like him?" The words hung in the air. No one spoke. A woman, by the dairy section, froze with a carton of milk in her hand. The cashier stopped scanning items mid-beep. A man near the door quietly put down his phone, realizing this wasn't just a celebrity sighting. Rick swallowed hard. "No, sir, I didn't mean that. Keanu cut him off softly." "Just what? Saw a young boy with dark skin and thought trouble?" The question wasn't loud, but it landed like a thunderclap. Rick opened his mouth, searching for an answer that wouldn't make him sound worse. None came. Malik, standing slightly behind Keanu, shifted his feet. His small voice broke through the silence. "I just wanted to buy bread." The sound of it cracked something in the room. Keanu turned toward him slowly, his eyes softening. "Did you bring money, son?" Malik nodded. His hand trembled as he pulled out the crumpled dollar bills, unfolding them carefully, like proof of his innocence. Keanu crouched down to Malik's level, his voice gentle now. "You did nothing wrong." He looked up at Rick again, still calm, still controlled. "Then he's a customer. And you owe him an apology." Rick shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I didn't mean any harm. It's just Keanu didn't let him finish. It's not about meaning harm. It's about what you did. You embarrassed a child in front of strangers for no reason. That kind of thing stays with people." A woman near the fruit aisle whispered, "He's right." Another nodded silently. Rick's jaw tightened. He muttered under his breath, "I was just doing my job." Keanu stood again, tall, composed, but his eyes flashed with restrained emotion. "If doing your job means humiliating a child, maybe you need a new one." The tension in the store grew thick. Malik looked up, his wide eyes flicking between them, unsure what would happen next. Keanu took a breath, steady and deliberate. "Come on," he said softly to Malik. "Let's finish what you came here to do." Keanu placed a gentle hand on Malik's shoulder as they walked together toward the checkout counter. Every step echoed softly on the tile floor, yet the air felt charged, as though the entire room was holding its breath. The customers had stopped pretending to browse. Their eyes followed quietly as Keanu and the boy approached the counter. Rick trailed a few steps behind them, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. His earlier confidence had drained away, replaced by an uneasiness that seemed to grow with each word Keanu spoke. "Go ahead, son," Keanu said softly. "Get what you came for." Malik hesitated at first, but then, seeing Keanu's calm smile, he reached for another loaf of bread from the nearby shelf and placed it gently on the counter. His small hand still trembled, but there was a quiet courage in the way he stood beside Keanu. The cashier, a young woman named Laura, swallowed nervously. She'd seen everything. "That'll be $2.50, sir," she said quietly, looking between the two of them. Malik handed her the 3 crumpled dollar bills he'd been holding since he entered the store. She gave him change, just 50 cents, and slipped it into his hand with a faint, apologetic smile. Keanu turned toward Rick, his tone controlled but unyielding. "You see, he had the money. He came here to buy, not to take. That's what a customer looks like." Rick's lips parted, but no words came out. His shoulders sagged slightly under the weight of shame. The people nearby were silent, watching the exchange unfold like something sacred. Keanu continued, "You said you've had shoplifters before. I understand that. But let me ask you something. Rick, do they all look like this boy? Or is that just what you've been taught to expect?" Rick's gaze fell to the floor. He didn't answer. A man from the dairy aisle called out quietly, "He's right, man. You can't treat people like that." A few others murmured in agreement. One woman shook her head sadly. Keanu looked around the store, then back to Malik. This kind of thing happens too often. People judge before they listen. But the truth is simple. If you're afraid of a child because of the color of his skin, maybe you shouldn't be a security guard. The words landed softly, yet they carried more power than any raised voice could. Rick swallowed hard. I didn't mean. Keanu stopped him with a calm gesture. Intent doesn't erase the hurt. You've got a chance to do better next time. Take it. For the first time, Rick's voice faltered. I'm sorry, kid. Malik looked up, unsure how to respond. He simply nodded and said quietly, It's okay. The entire store seemed to exhale. A few customers began clapping softly, then others joined in. It wasn't loud or forced, just genuine relief that someone had finally stood up. Malik lowered his head, embarrassed, but smiling faintly through tears. The applause faded into a hushed stillness, leaving behind a quiet that felt almost reverent. Malik clutched his small bag of groceries against his chest. The paper crinkled softly as he looked up at Keanu, uncertain of what to do next. Keanu gave him a reassuring nod. Come on, he said kindly. Let's head out. They walked toward the door together. The glass reflected their figures, a young boy in a worn hoodie, beside a man whose calm presence seemed to fill the room. As they reached the exit, Keanu paused and turned back to Rick. Remember this moment, he said quietly. The next time you see a kid who reminds you of him, don't let fear decide how you act. Let fairness do that instead. Rick's throat tightened. He managed a faint nod, shame written across his face. The guard who once towered over Malik now looked small, fragile in his own guilt. Keanu opened the door, holding it for Malik as they stepped into the warm California air. Outside, the late afternoon light painted the pavement gold. The boy blinked against the brightness, still processing what had just happened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of traffic filled the silence between them. Malik finally whispered, Nobody ever stood up for me like that before. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, Malik. Sometimes people forget that, but when you remind them, even in small ways, it can change everything. Malik looked down at the bread in his hands. My mom's gonna be happy, he said, a hint of relief breaking through. Keanu chuckled lightly. She should be proud of you. You handled yourself with more dignity than most adults would. They walked together down the block, passing old storefronts with faded signs. Malik's steps were lighter now. He still carried the same worn shoes and tired clothes, but something about his posture had changed, straighter, steadier, as if a little of Keanu's strength had transferred to him. Behind them, inside the store, the world kept turning. Rick stood near the counter, watching them through the glass, his reflection mixing with theirs in the window. He could still hear Keanu's words repeating in his head. If you're afraid of a child because of his skin color, maybe you shouldn't be a security guard. Laura, the cashier, broke the silence. You think he'll be back tomorrow? She asked quietly. Rick sighed. I hope so, he said. Maybe I'll get it right next time. Back on the street, Keanu guided Malik to the corner crosswalk. You live nearby? He asked. Malik nodded. Just a few blocks that way. My mom's been sick, but I help out when I can. Keanu looked at him with quiet admiration. You're a good son. That's something no one can ever take from you. The light turned green, and they crossed slowly, together. Behind them, the store door chimed faintly as someone entered life, resuming, but not quite the same. That single moment of confrontation had planted something larger than words. A lesson, a shift, a reminder that one person's courage can challenge an entire crowd's silence. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through rows of old palm trees as Keanu and Malik stepped away from the store. The noise of the traffic filled the background, but for a while, neither spoke. Malik walked a few steps ahead, clutching the small brown bag that held the loaf of bread as if it were something precious. Keanu followed beside him, his hands in his pockets, his stride calm and unhurried. So, Keanu began gently, where's home, Malik? Malik pointed down the street. "A few blocks that way, near the old laundromat." His voice was quiet, careful, as though each word needed permission to be spoken. "Your mom waiting for you?" Keanu asked. Malik nodded. "Yeah. She's been sick. Pneumonia," the doctor said. "She's trying to get better, but it's hard. She works a lot when she's healthy. 2 jobs. One at the diner, one cleaning houses." Keanu's brow furrowed slightly. "That's a lot for one person." "Yeah," Malik said softly. "But she never complains. She just says God gave her me for a reason, so I try to help." Keanu looked at him with quiet admiration. "You're a good kid." Malik shrugged, his eyes fixed on the cracks in the sidewalk. "I just don't like seeing her tired. Today she couldn't even get up. We ran out of bread, so I skipped lunch at school to buy some." Keanu glanced at him, the boy's honesty stirring something deep within him. There was strength in Malik's small frame, the kind born from necessity, not choice. They passed a row of worn-down storefronts, their signs faded by years of sunlight. A man sat on the corner tuning a broken guitar, while another pushed a cart full of cans. The world here was tired, but still alive in its own way. "Your dad around?" Keanu asked softly. Malik hesitated, then shook his head. "He passed away 2 years ago. Car accident on the freeway. He used to drive trucks." Keanu stopped walking for a moment. The words hit him quietly, like an echo from his own past. He took a slow breath and continued beside the boy. "I'm sorry to hear that." Malik nodded, but didn't look up. "It's okay. Mom says he's still watching over us. But sometimes, I don't know, it's been hard." Keanu let the silence stretch, allowing Malik's words to settle. After a moment, he said gently, "You remind me of someone I knew when I was your age. He had to grow up fast too. But you know what he learned?" Malik looked at him curiously. "What?" "That strength doesn't come from what you can carry," Keanu said. "It comes from what you refuse to put down, like love or hope." The boy thought about that for a while, his small face tightening with quiet understanding. The wind blew lightly through his hoodie, and for the first time that day, he allowed himself to smile. They turned onto a narrower street, lined with cracked pavement and flickering streetlights that hadn't been repaired in years. Laundry hung from balconies above them, swaying gently in the evening breeze. The smell of cooking drifted from open windows, onions, garlic, something warm and familiar. Malik's neighborhood wasn't dangerous, but it carried the quiet fatigue of people who had worked too hard for too long. Keanu glanced around as they walked. "How long have you lived here?" Malik thought for a moment. "Since I was 7. We used to live closer to downtown, but after my dad's accident, Mom couldn't afford the rent anymore, so we moved here. It's not bad, just small." He pointed toward a cluster of low buildings at the end of the block. "That's our place. 2nd floor, near the red door." Keanu nodded, listening. He could see the pride in the way Malik described it, not in the walls or space, but in the sense of belonging it gave. "What's your mom's name?" "Tanya," Malik said. "She used to sing to me every night before bed. She still tries when she's not coughing too much. She says songs can keep you brave." Keanu smiled gently. "She sounds like a good woman." "She is," Malik said firmly. "She always says people can be mean sometimes, but I shouldn't let that change me." They reached a crosswalk. The signal flickered between red and green, stuck in its cycle. Cars passed slowly, their headlights painting the cracked asphalt in streaks of gold. Keanu looked down at the boy beside him, his small shoulders hunched beneath the oversized hoodie. "Malik," he said quietly, "earlier when that man talked to you the way he did, how often does that happen?" Malik hesitated, his voice dropping. "A lot. Not always like that, but people look at me weird. Sometimes when I walk into stores, they follow me around, like I'm gonna take something. I can feel it." He kicked at a pebble on the sidewalk, watching it roll. "People always look at me like I did something wrong before I even talk." The words cut deeper than they should have. Keanu slowed his pace, his heart heavy. He had seen injustice in many forms, but hearing it from a 12-year-old boy turned it into something raw and personal. He said softly, "You deserve to be seen for who you are, not for what someone fears." Malik looked up at him, unsure how to respond. Keanu's expression was kind, but serious, his eyes full of empathy. "You hear me?" "Yeah," Malik said after a pause. "I hear you." They continued walking, their footsteps sinking naturally. Keanu's tall frame cast a long shadow beside Malik's smaller one, both stretching ahead of them under the fading sunlight. As they neared the end of the block, Keanu glanced at the boy again. "You know, it's getting late. How about I give you a ride home?" Malik hesitated. "You don't have to, Mr. Reeves. It's okay." Keanu smiled. "I know I don't have to, but I want to." The boy looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." Keanu led Malik toward his car, parked near the corner cafe, the same spot where he had been sitting when everything started. The city was shifting into evening mode now. The glow of streetlights washed over cracked sidewalks, and the sound of a bus braking at a nearby stop filled the air. Malik glanced at the car, a modest black sedan that didn't look flashy or expensive. "You really drive this?" Malik asked curiously. Keanu laughed softly. "Yeah, it gets me where I need to go. I've never cared much about fancy things." Malik smiled faintly. "I thought famous people had big cars." "Some do," Keanu said. "But I like quiet. Besides, cars don't make people important. How you treat others does." Malik nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. He climbed into the passenger seat carefully, making sure his bag of bread didn't tear. The seats were clean but well used, and the faint smell of coffee and leather filled the air. As they pulled away, Malik looked out the window at the passing streets, the flickering neon signs, the laundromat with its open door, the corner store they had just left behind. "I don't think I'll go there again," he said quietly. Keanu glanced at him. "Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's knowing your worth. You didn't deserve what happened in there, Malik." But how you handled it, staying calm, speaking the truth, that took real strength. The boy looked down at his hands. "I was scared." "Of course you were," Keanu said gently. "But courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are." They stopped at a red light. A group of kids on bicycles rode by laughing, their tires humming on the asphalt. Malik watched them and said, almost to himself, "I wish people saw me like that. Just another kid having fun." Keanu turned to him. "They will. One day. You just keep being who you are. The world will catch up." The light turned green, and they continued down the Predators Road. The neighborhood grew quieter the farther they went. The sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the horizon in streaks of pink and gold. Keanu found himself glancing at Malik, the boy's thoughtful expression framed by the window's fading light. He looked fragile, yet resilient, like a seed pushing through concrete. As they turned onto Malik Street, Keanu said, "You know, I used to walk around a lot as a kid too. Didn't have much, but I had good people who reminded me not to give up. Maybe you just needed someone to remind you today." Malik smiled for the first time without hesitation. "You did." Keanu parked near the red door Malik had pointed out earlier. "Here we are," he said softly. Malik held the bread close and turned to him. "Thanks, Mr. Reeves, for everything." Keanu smiled warmly. "You don't owe me thanks, Malik. You just promise me one thing: never believe anyone who tries to make you feel less than what you are." The boy nodded firmly. "I promise." As Malik stepped out and started up the stairs toward his apartment, Keanu watched him go small, determined, and already carrying the quiet dignity of someone far older than his years. The red door creaked as Malik pushed it open, revealing a narrow hallway with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of lemon cleaner. The apartment was small, 2 rooms, 1 kitchen, and a tiny living space that doubled as a bedroom. The sound of a weak cough came from inside, followed by a gentle voice calling out, "Malik? Is that you, baby?" "Yeah, Mama," Malik answered, his tone instantly softening. "I got the bread." Keanu stepped inside behind him, careful to close the door quietly. The late sun filtered through a thin curtain, painting the room in warm, muted light. On a small couch against the wall lay Tanya Johnson, Malik's mother. Her face was pale, her hair wrapped in a scarf, and her breathing came in short, uneven pulls. When her eyes met Keanu's, confusion flickered across her face before turning into disbelief. She tried to sit up, one hand clutching the armrest for balance. She coughed, covering her mouth with a tissue. You're Keanu Reeves. Keanu raised his hands gently. Please, just Keanu. I was nearby when Malik had some trouble at the store. I wanted to make sure you were both all right. Tanya's eyes widened and her voice trembled. Oh my God, what happened? Malik, are you okay? Malik nodded quickly, setting the bread on the counter. I'm fine, Mama. It wasn't my fault. Keanu smiled softly, stepping closer. He did everything right. It was someone else who forgot how to see people. Tanya's hand went to her chest as she exhaled in relief. I don't know what to say. Thank you for helping my boy. You don't have to thank me, Keanu said quietly. He didn't deserve to be treated that way. He glanced around the apartment, the modest furniture, the neatly folded blankets, the family photos on the wall. One caught his eye, a younger Tanya standing beside a tall man in a trucker's uniform, his arm around her shoulders, both smiling brightly. The frame had a small crack across one corner. That your husband? Keanu asked softly. Tanya nodded, her eyes misting. Yeah, that's Jamal. He was a long-haul truck driver, worked every hour he could. 2 years ago, there was an accident outside Bakersfield. A tire blew out. He didn't make it. Keanu lowered his gaze, his voice quiet and sincere. I'm so sorry. She gave a weak nod, holding the photo gently in her hands. We got through it somehow. Malik keeps me going. She smiled faintly at her son, who was now pouring water into a kettle on the stove. You've done a wonderful job, Keanu said, meaning every word. Tanya let out a tired laugh. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it. I just try to keep the lights on and make sure he knows he's loved. The kettle began to whistle softly, filling the small kitchen with a thin trail of steam. Malik hurried to pour the hot water into 2 chipped mugs and reached for a half-empty box of tea bags. Keanu stepped in to help, moving with quiet familiarity. Let me, he said gently, taking the pot from Malik before the boy could burn his hand. Tanya watched from the couch, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You don't need to do that, Mr. Reeves. Keanu shook his head as he stirred the cups. If I can help, I will. That's how my mother raised me. Tanya's expression softened. Your mama raised you right. She coughed again, a dry, painful sound that made Malik glance over with worry. Sit down, Mama, he said, walking to her side. Please, don't talk too much. Keanu carried the tea to the small table near the couch and set 1 cup in front of her. The other he kept in his hands, letting the steam warm his fingers. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, the kind of hum that spoke of years of use and struggle. Keanu opened the door slightly to grab some milk for the tea, but the inside was almost bare, a half carton of milk, a few eggs, and some leftovers in a plastic container. He closed it quietly, his heart tightening. Tanya caught his glance and gave a small, embarrassed smile. We're doing okay, she said softly, as if to convince herself. I get paid on Friday. Keanu nodded but didn't respond right away. He sat down on a wooden chair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. Malik told me you've been sick. Tanya nodded. Pneumonia. Doctor says it'll pass, but it's hard when you don't have time to rest. I've been trying to work when I can, but the energy's just not there. Do you have someone helping you? Keanu asked. Just a neighbor now and then, she said, taking a slow sip of tea. People got their own problems. I don't like asking for much. Malik sat quietly beside her, his knees pulled close. I try to help her, he said softly. I clean and make food when she can't. I even learned how to wash clothes at the laundromat. Keanu smiled at him. You're a good son. The boy shrugged, his eyes fixed on the floor. I just don't want her to worry. Tanya reached over and touched his hand. You're the reason I keep going, she whispered. Keanu felt a deep ache in his chest at the tenderness between them. He had seen love in many forms, but this one quiet, humble, and unyielding struck him as something rare. Tanya looked back at Keanu. I'm sorry if Malik caused trouble at that store. He's a good boy. Sometimes, people just don't see that. Keanu smiled gently. He didn't cause trouble. He reminded me what's wrong with how we treat each other and how much we can change when we decide to do better. Tanya blinked back tears, the corners of her eyes shining. It means a lot to hear that, she said quietly. Sometimes it feels like the world forgets people like us exist. You work hard, pay your dues, and still, someone looks at your child like he's a threat. Her voice wavered, but she forced a weak smile. I tell Malik not to let it change him, but inside it hurts. Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze steady. It's not something anyone should have to get used to. You're doing more than most parents could. You're teaching him kindness in a world that too often rewards the opposite. Tanya exhaled shakily and looked at her son. He's got his daddy's heart. Jamal used to say, you can't fix hate with hate, only with example. Keanu let those words linger for a moment. He sounds like a wise man. He was, Tanya said, her voice trembling. He'd be proud of Malik. He'd be thankful to you, too. Keanu's expression softened, his tone humble. You don't owe me anything. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because no one should ever feel small for doing the right thing. Malik leaned against his mother's arm. Mr. Reeves told that guard he shouldn't be afraid of a kid because of his skin. Everyone in the store went quiet. Tanya's eyebrows lifted slightly, a mix of surprise and pride. You said that? Keanu smiled faintly. It was the truth. Sometimes the truth needs a voice. The room fell quiet for a moment. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance before fading away into the hum of the city. Malik traced his finger along the edge of the table, lost in thought. Tanya took another sip of tea, her hands shaking slightly. You know, she said softly, we used to watch your movies together. Jamal loved how you always played the man who stood up for people. I used to tell him, if only there were more men like that in real life. Keanu looked down, humbled. I've had good examples too, he said. People who believed in kindness when no one else did. I just try to follow their lead. The kettle on the stove hissed faintly again. Malik rose to turn it off, careful not to make noise. Keanu watched him for a moment, this small, gentle soul, carrying more responsibility than most adults. He turned back to Tanya. You've raised a strong boy, he said. That takes strength most people never see. She smiled weakly. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough. You are, Keanu said softly. You're teaching him love in the middle of struggle. That's everything. Tanya looked at him with gratitude, shining through her fatigue. I wish the world had more people who cared the way you do. Keanu shook his head gently. The world doesn't need more people like me. It needs more people like Malik, brave, honest, and kind, even when others aren't. The room fell silent again, filled not with sorrow, but with quiet understanding. Malik rested his head on his mother's shoulder as Keanu rose too. Leave. Get some rest, Tanya, he said warmly. I'll check on you both tomorrow. As he stepped out into the hallway, the sound of Malik's soft laughter followed him, the sound of a boy who, for the first time that day, felt safe. By the next morning, Los Angeles was buzzing. A shaky phone video had started making its way across social media, the clip captured inside that small grocery store where everything had unfolded. The video began with Malik's trembling voice saying, I just wanted to buy bread, and ended with Keanu Reeves standing beside him, telling the guard, if you're afraid of a child because of his skin color, maybe you shouldn't be a security guard. The clip was less than 2 minutes long, but it struck something deep in people. On one platform, a woman captioned it, "This is what humanity looks like." Another wrote, Keanu Reeves just did more in 2 minutes than some people do in a lifetime. Within hours, the video had millions of views, shared by celebrities, journalists, and even teachers who used it in their classrooms as a lesson on empathy. Headlines appeared everywhere. Keanu Reeves confronts racial bias at local store. Hollywood star defends one 2-year-old boy in powerful moment of kindness. Talk shows replayed the footage. Analysts discussed it, and morning news anchors described it as a quiet stand that shook the internet. But not all reactions were kind. Some doubted the story, claiming it was exaggerated. A few online commentators said it was a setup for publicity. Others argued about what really happened inside the store. The internet, as always, divided itself between outrage and admiration. Keanu ignored it all. While the world debated his intentions, he spent the day working quietly on set, turning down every request for interviews. When one reporter caught up to him in the parking lot and asked, "Mr. Reeves, do you have a statement about the incident?" he simply replied, "Kindness doesn't need headlines." That night, Malik and Tanya sat in their living room, watching their old television flicker with the very footage. The sound of Keanu's calm voice filled the small apartment. Tanya's eyes widened as she realized the world had seen what happened. "Oh Lord," she whispered. "They filmed it?" Malik nodded shyly. "I didn't know someone was recording." The next segment showed Keanu's face on the news beside Malik's photo with the headline, "A Viral Moment of Humanity." Tanya set down her tea and rubbed her forehead. "I don't want trouble, Malik. You know how things spread. People start talking, and sometimes that brings the wrong kind of attention." Malik looked uncertain, but he helped us, Mama. He told the truth. Tanya sighed, torn between pride and fear. "I know, baby. I just don't want anyone to twist it." The phone on the table buzzed with notifications, messages from neighbors, church members, even people she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to know if it was really them in the video. Malik's voice trembled slightly. "What if people at school see it?" Tanya looked at him with gentle firmness. "Then hold your head high. You did nothing wrong." That evening, Keanu's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Normally, he ignored such calls, but something told him to answer. On the other end was a voice, older and nervous. "Mr. Reeves, this is Harold Peterson. I own the grocery store where that incident happened." Keanu leaned back in his chair. "Yes, Mr. Peterson, I remember. I just wanted to reach out personally," Peterson said, his words tumbling over each other. "First, I want to apologize deeply. What happened yesterday should never have occurred in my store. I'm embarrassed and ashamed. That security guard, Rick, he's been with us for years. I never imagined." Keanu interrupted gently. "It's not about imagining, Mr. Peterson. It's about awareness." Peterson paused, taken aback by the calm firmness in Keanu's tone. "You're absolutely right," he said, after a long silence. "I saw the video. It broke my heart." Looked terrified. "We failed him," Keanu sighed softly. "I appreciate you saying that, but I don't want this to become about punishment. What matters more is what comes next. What's learned." Peterson's voice softened. "I agree. I've already spoken with Rick. He's suspended until we can retrain our staff. We're organizing an internal meeting about racial bias and respect. I want to make sure this never happens again." "That's a good start," Keanu said. "If people learn from it, that's progress." "Would you be willing to speak to the team?" Peterson asked suddenly. "You don't have to make a public appearance. Just a few words." "They'd listen to you." Keanu hesitated, thinking about the long day ahead of him, but then nodded to himself. "If it helps create understanding, yes, I'll do it." After they hung up, Keanu sat quietly for a moment, staring at the dark city outside his window. Lights flickered across the skyline, reminders that millions of lives carried on, each with their own unseen stories of struggle and hope. Across town, in the small apartment above the red door, Tanya scrolled through her phone nervously. Her inbox was flooded messages from reporters, nonprofit organizations, even strangers offering help. She felt overwhelmed. Malik sat beside her on the couch, holding the loaf of bread they hadn't yet finished from the night before. "People keep writing," Tanya murmured. "Some are kind. Some are asking questions I don't want to answer." Malik frowned. "Are we in trouble?" "No, baby," she said softly, pulling him close. "We're just visible now. And sometimes, when people finally see you, they don't always know what to do with it." Keanu texted her shortly after. "Don't worry about what people say. The truth brings light, not trouble." Tanya read it twice, her chest tightening with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt that maybe something good could come from their pain. Outside, sirens wailed faintly as the city carried on, unaware that in one small home, hope had quietly begun to grow again. By the next morning, the story had reached television networks across the country. News anchors replayed the clip in slow motion. Malik's frightened face, Keanu's calm but firm response, and the line that had already begun trending online. If you're afraid of a child because of his skin color, maybe you shouldn't be a security guard. On social media, people wrote essays, poems, and reflections about that sentence. Some teachers used it in classrooms. Others printed it on posters. A civil rights organization even shared it with the caption, "Compassion can change the world, one voice at a time." Keanu stayed silent through it all. He refused interviews, avoided red carpets, and focused instead on the people at the heart of the story. He called Tanya later that day to check in. "How are you both holding up?" he asked. "We're okay," Tanya said. "It's strange. Everyone's talking about us like we're a story, but we're just living our lives." "I know," Keanu replied softly. "Sometimes the world needs stories like yours to remember what empathy looks like, but don't let it overwhelm you. Let it bring you peace." There was a pause before Tanya whispered, "You have no idea what you did for my boy. He's walking taller today." Keanu smiled quietly. "Good. That's all that matters." Meanwhile, at the grocery store, life had changed overnight. Reporters stood outside, interviewing customers. Some came to support the business for owning up to the mistake. Others came to protest, holding signs that read, "Respect every child," and "Dignity has no color." Inside, the store's owner, Mr. Peterson, gathered his employees in the break room. Rick sat near the back, head lowered, listening as Peterson spoke. "We can't erase what happened," Peterson said, his voice tight with emotion. "But we can learn from it. We will become better starting today." Rick raised his eyes slowly. "I want to apologize," he said quietly, "to Malik and to everyone who saw that video. I thought I was protecting the store, but I forgot to protect a person's dignity." Some employees nodded. Others wiped their eyes. The moment was small, but sincere, the kind that doesn't trend online, but changes something deeper. That evening, Keanu received a photo message from Mr. Peterson. It showed the store's front door with a new sign posted above it. "All are welcome here." He smiled and forwarded to Tanya. She replied a minute later, "It's a start." Keanu looked out his window at the glowing city beyond. He knew the world would move on, soon another story, another scandal, another distraction. But for one boy and his mother, something lasting had changed. People had seen Malik's face. They'd heard his trembling voice. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone saw a kid who looked suspicious, they'd stop and remember the boy who only wanted to buy bread. The following week brought Malik back into a routine that felt both familiar and changed. The world around him looked the same cracked sidewalks, the same crowded classrooms, but people now saw him differently. At school, whispers followed him down the hallway. Some kids pointed, others smiled awkwardly, not knowing what to say. He had become that boy from the video, though he never asked for it. In homeroom, Malik sat at his desk, sketching quietly in his notebook. While other students chatted, he drew lines that turned into shapes, and shapes that turned into faces. The pencil moved like a part of him. On the paper, he began sketching the scene that had changed everything. The grocery store aisle, the security guard's angry face, and Keanu standing tall between them. A shadow fell over his desk. Malik looked up to see Ethan, a taller 8th grader with a smirk on his face. "Hey, superstar," Ethan said mockingly. "You famous now or something?" Malik didn't respond. He focused on his drawing, hoping silence would make the boy go away. Ethan leaned closer. "You think you're better than us because some actor talked to you?" "No," Malik said softly, without looking up. "I don't think that," Ethan scoffed. "Sure you don't." Then he snatched the notebook off Malik's desk. "What's this?" "Oh, look, little hero drawing his big moment." The nearby students turned to watch. A few snickered, but one girl frowned and said, "Give it back, Ethan." Ethan ignored her and flipped through the pages. Malik's drawings showed more than skill, they showed heart. There were sketches of his mother sleeping, of the apartment kitchen, of strangers on buses, all drawn with careful detail and quiet tenderness. Ethan hesitated for a moment, the beauty of the art catching him off guard, but he quickly masked it with sarcasm. "You should draw something cool, not this boring stuff." "Give it back," Malik said, his voice firmer now. A voice from the front of the room broke in. "Ethan!" Everyone turned. Miss Alvarez, their art teacher, stood by the door holding a stack of papers. Her tone carried authority that cut through the noise. "Return the notebook, now." Ethan frowned, but obeyed, tossing it onto Malik's desk before slumping into his chair. Miss Alvarez approached, lowering her voice. "Malik, may I see what you're working on?" Malik hesitated, then nodded. She turned a few pages, her eyes softening as she studied the sketches. "These are beautiful," she said. "You have a gift, Malik. You draw what people feel, not just what they look like." He looked down shyly. "It helps me think." Miss Alvarez smiled. "Then never stop. Your art shows kindness. Don't let the world make you afraid to be that." Her words settled in his chest, like warmth spreading through a cold room. For the first time that day, Malik felt seen for something other than the video. After class, Malik lingered behind, while the others rushed out to lunch. He carefully slid his sketchbook into his backpack, still thinking about Miss Alvarez's words. She was one of the few adults who didn't talk to him like he was fragile. When she spoke, she sounded like she believed in him, not because of the video, but because of who he was. As he walked through the crowded hallway, he could hear bits of conversation about him. "That's the kid Keanu Reeves helped. My mom showed me that video. He's lucky." Each whisper made him shrink a little. To them, he wasn't Malik Johnson anymore. He was a headline. He went to the cafeteria, grabbed a tray, and found an empty table near the back. He opened his notebook again and began sketching quietly. The noise around him faded as he focused on the page, a habit that had always helped him escape. This time, he drew something different. It was Keanu again, but not the movie star. He drew the calm face, the steady eyes, the way he had crouched down beside him in the store, listening without judgment. Underneath the drawing, Malik wrote one simple word: respect. A shadow fell over the table. Malik looked up. It was Miss Alvarez again, carrying her own lunch tray. "Mind if I sit?" He shook his head, surprised but grateful. She sat across from him and took a quiet bite before nodding toward the drawing. "That's him, isn't it? The man from the video?" Malik smiled faintly. "Yeah, he helped me. He helped a lot of people, Malik," she said. "You know, I showed this clip in my night class. My students were talking about how one act of courage can start a chain of others." He looked thoughtful. "I didn't mean for it to go everywhere. I didn't even know someone was filming." "I know," she said kindly. "But maybe this story needed to be told. Maybe you and your mom reminded people of something they forgot." Malik glanced down at his tray. "I just wish people would stop staring at me. I didn't do anything special." Miss Alvarez smiled softly. "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't about being special. It's about being real. You handled that moment with grace. And now, you get to decide what to do with the attention it brought." He looked up, curious. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this is your chance to use that voice through your art, through kindness, to make others feel seen the way he made you feel." Malik didn't answer right away, but her words planted a seed. He thought about Keanu's calm voice in the store, his mother's tired smile, and the way people online had written about the video. Maybe this attention could become something good if he used it the right way. That night, Malik sat at the small kitchen table beside his mother. The TV murmured in the background, showing yet another news segment replaying the video. Tanya sighed, turning down the volume. "They just won't let it rest," she said quietly. "It's like they turned our pain into a story to talk about over dinner." Malik looked up from his drawing pad. "Do you think people will forget?" Tanya smiled weakly. They always do, baby. But maybe not this time. He hesitated, tracing a pencil over the page. Miss Alvarez said my drawings show kindness. She told me not to be afraid of it. Tanya's eyes softened. She sounds like a smart woman. Malik turned the pad around to show her what he'd been sketching. It was the grocery store again. But this time, the focus wasn't on fear or anger. He'd drawn Keanu standing tall between him and the guard, the soft light from the store window reflecting behind them like a halo. It wasn't a picture of confrontation, it was one of protection. Tanya covered her mouth, moved by the emotion on the page. That's beautiful. Baby, I want to give it to him, Malik said quietly, to thank him. She nodded slowly. If that's what your heart tells you, you should. Later that evening, as Malik packed away his sketchbook, he noticed a small envelope on the kitchen counter addressed to him. His name was written neatly in blue ink. "What's this?" he asked. Tanya looked just as surprised. It came with the mail, no return address. Malik carefully tore it open. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "Hi Malik, I hope you're doing okay. I wanted to thank you for reminding everyone that kindness still matters. There's a place I think you'd like, the Safe Youth Center. We do art, stories, and projects to make the city better. I'd love for you to come by if you want. No cameras, no attention, just good people." Keanu Malik stared at the letter for a long time. "He wants me to visit?" Tanya smiled gently. "Looks like it. But what if people are there? What if they start talking again?" She reached out, touching his hand. "Maybe this is a sign. You can't hide from kindness, baby. It finds you for a reason." He looked at her, uncertain but comforted by her words. The note felt different from all the noise online, quiet, genuine, personal. That night, Malik placed the letter beside his sketchbook and lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about the art teacher's words, his mother's tired smile, and Keanu's steady voice in that store. Maybe this was his next step, not running from what happened, but finding something new because of it. When the morning light crept through the window, he made up his mind. He folded the letter carefully into his backpack and whispered to himself, "Okay, I'll go." Saturday morning arrived bright and cool. The kind of Los Angeles morning where the air smelled faintly of dew and distant ocean. Malik sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folded letter from Keanu. He'd read it so many times that the creases had softened, but still, he hesitated. His mother moved quietly around the kitchen, fixing tea and humming a tune through her tired voice. "You're thinking about going, aren't you?" Tanya asked gently. Malik nodded. "I want to, but what if people there know about the video? What if they stare?" Tanya poured tea into 2 mismatched cups and set one in front of him. "They might know, baby. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe someone there needs to hear your story. Not the internet version, but the real one." He nodded slowly, gripping the cup in both hands. "What if I say the wrong thing?" Tanya smiled. "Then you'll learn something new. That's what growing up is." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. When Malik opened it, Keanu stood there, casual in jeans and a flannel shirt, holding a box of art supplies. "Morning," he said with a warm grin. "You ready?" Malik blinked, startled. "You came to get me?" "Well," Keanu said, handing him the box. "You said you were nervous. I figured we'd face it together." Tanya stepped forward, still surprised. "You didn't have to do that, Mr. Reeves." "I know," Keanu replied softly, "but I wanted to." The car ride was quiet but comfortable. Malik watched the streets roll by, colorful murals, kids riding bikes, and older men sweeping the front of small shops. The city felt alive again. Keanu pointed to a building ahead painted in bright blues and yellows, its entrance surrounded by trees and a handmade banner that read Safe Youth Center. As they pulled up, Malik saw children of all backgrounds laughing in the courtyard. Black, Latino, Asian, white, playing basketball, painting on easels, and planting flowers in a small garden patch. Keanu parked and turned to him. "This is where I come when I need to be reminded that there's more good in the world than bad. You ready to see it?" Malik nodded, his nerves melting slightly at Keanu's calm tone. Inside, the building buzzed with quiet energy. The walls were lined with colorful artwork, each painting signed by a child's name and age. A few older volunteers helped kids mix paint and shape clay. The air smelled faintly of crayons and hope. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and curly hair approached. "Keanu, you made it!" He smiled. "Always good to see you, Lila." She turned to Malik, offering a warm smile. "You must be Malik. Welcome, sweetheart. We're glad you're here." Malik followed Leela through a wide hallway filled with murals. Each one told a story: a boy releasing a dove, a girl standing beneath a rainbow, children holding hands across a painted globe. Lila pointed proudly. Every wall here was done by the kids. Some of them had tough starts, but when they come here, they find a place that listens. They stepped into a large open room where a dozen children were gathered around art tables. A tall boy was painting a mountain landscape, while two younger girls decorated frames with glitter and beads. Malik hesitated at the door, gripping the box of art supplies Keanu had given him. Lila smiled gently. "You can sit anywhere, sweetheart. No one's a stranger here." Keanu gave Malik an encouraging nod. "I'll be around if you need me. Just have fun." Malik took a seat near the end of the table. A boy his age, maybe 13, glanced up from his drawing. "Hey, you new?" "Yeah," Malik said softly. "I'm Marcus," the boy said, holding out a paint-stained hand. "You like to draw?" Malik nodded, setting down his supplies. "A little," Marcus grinned. "That's what everyone says right before they turn out to be amazing." Their laughter broke the ice. Soon, Malik was sketching quietly beside Marcus, the sound of pencils scratching on paper blending with the hum of chatter around them. Across the room, Keanu helped two kids build a birdhouse, his flannel sleeves rolled up. Every so often, he looked over and smiled when he saw Malik concentrating. Lila leaned against the doorway, watching with quiet satisfaction. She whispered to Keanu, "You have a way with them, especially the quiet ones." Keanu smiled faintly. "They just need someone to listen. That's all any of us ever really need." A few hours passed before Malik set his pencil down and leaned back. On his page was a drawing of the center itself. The building, bathed in sunlight, children playing, laughter in motion. It wasn't perfect, but it felt alive. Marcus leaned over and whistled softly. "Man, that's good. You should hang it on the wall." Malik smiled shyly. "Maybe one day." When the session ended, the kids gathered for snacks in the courtyard. Keanu joined them, sitting beside Malik on the wooden steps. "So," he said, taking a sip of juice, "how'd it go?" Malik looked around at the laughing kids, the colors, the music playing softly through a speaker. "It feels peaceful," he said finally. Keanu nodded. "That's the idea. When people make you feel small, it's not because you are. It's because they don't understand their own fear. Don't let it touch who you are." Malik listened, his young face reflecting deep thought. "So when people stare at me, it's not about me?" Keanu smiled. "No, Malik, it's never about you. It's about what they don't yet see in themselves." The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of the center, casting warm light across the art tables. Most of the kids had gone home, but Malik lingered, finishing one last drawing. Keanu sat nearby, helping Lila clean brushes and put away paint jars. Every few minutes, he glanced at Malik, watching the boys. Focus that quiet determination that reminded him of something pure and unshaken. When Malik finally looked up, he smiled shyly. "I think I'm done." Keanu walked over and crouched beside him. On the paper was a detailed sketch of the youth center from his perspective. The trees out front, the open doors, the kids laughing in the courtyard. But right in the middle of it all, Malik had drawn something subtle. A circle of children holding hands, their faces all different but smiling in unison. Above it, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Safe feels like this." Keanu took a slow breath. "That's beautiful, Malik. You really captured what this place means." Malik looked down, his voice quiet. "I never knew places like this existed, where people don't judge you first." Keanu nodded. "That's why I help keep it running." The world's full of noise, people arguing, blaming, dividing. But here, it's just kids being kids again. Malik traced the edge of his drawing with his finger. "Do you come here a lot?" "Whenever I can," Keanu said. "Sometimes I teach a class. Sometimes I just listen. It keeps me grounded." Malik smiled faintly. "My mom would like it here." "Bring her next time," Keanu said warmly. "She'll love seeing what you've made." Lila walked over then, drying her hands with a towel. She leaned over Malik's shoulder and smiled at the drawing. "That's going on the wall," she said. "No arguments." Malik's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," Lila said. "You've just added something special to this place." Keanu and Lila framed the drawing before Malik could protest, slipping it behind the glass display near the entrance. When he saw it there, surrounded by the other paintings, something in him shifted. For the first time, he didn't feel like the boy from a viral video. He felt like an artist, someone who had something worth sharing. As the sky deepened into orange, Keanu and Malik stepped outside. The laughter of children still echoed from the back garden. Malik turned to Keanu and said softly, "Thank you for today." Keanu rested a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, Malik. This was your day. You brought something real into this place." Malik smiled and looked back at the center one more time. The evening light glowed against the painted walls, making the whole building seem alive. He whispered almost to himself, "Safe really does feel like this." That night, back home, Malik opened his sketchbook again. On a blank page, he drew a small candle burning bright in a dark room and wrote beneath it, "Kindness lights the way." 3 days later, the city felt different. The online buzz had quieted, the world had moved on, but for Malik, the story wasn't finished. That morning, Keanu called and asked simply, "How about we take another walk?" Malik agreed without hesitation. The sun was bright as they made their way down the familiar street. Malik carried his sketchbook under one arm, its corners slightly worn. His mother had encouraged him to go. "Sometimes healing means returning to where it hurt," she said softly. When they reached the grocery store, Malik stopped on the sidewalk. The glass door glimmered under the sunlight, the same door he'd been dragged through days ago. He took a breath. Keanu stood beside him, calm as always. "You ready?" he asked. "I think so," Malik said quietly. They stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled, and every head turned. The store was busy, but the chatter faded when people recognized Keanu. For a moment, it felt like time had paused. At the front stood Rick, the security guard. His uniform was pressed neatly, his hands clasped in front of him. He looked nervous, almost out of place. Behind him, the store owner, Mr. Peterson, emerged from the office. "Mr. Reeves," he said warmly, "thank you for coming back." Keanu gave a small nod. "We're just here to buy bread again, together this time." The words carried across the room, calm yet deliberate. Malik walked beside him, head held high this time. He went to the same shelf as before, picked up a loaf, and held it gently in his hands. Rick took a step forward, clearing his throat. "Malik," he said slowly, "I owe you an apology." The boy looked up, surprised. Rick's voice trembled slightly. "I was wrong. I judged you before I even knew you. I let my fear talk louder than my reason. I'm sorry for what I did." For a long moment, Malik didn't say anything. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerators. Then, Malik glanced at Keanu, who gave him an encouraging nod. The boy turned back to Rick and said, "Okay." Rick blinked. "Okay?" Malik nodded again. "You said you were sorry. That means you're trying to do better. I can forgive that." The guard's shoulders relaxed, his eyes glassy with emotion. "Thank you, kid." "Mister." Peterson stepped forward and placed a hand on Rick's shoulder. "We've all learned something these past few days. I've seen how much this moment meant to people." He turned to Keanu. "And to think it started with a loaf of bread." Keanu smiled faintly. "Sometimes, that's all it takes." A few customers nearby began to applaud softly. Others joined in, not out of excitement, but out of respect. Malik stood between Keanu and Rick, a bridge between two very different worlds that for a moment found understanding. The applause faded, replaced by the soft sound of footsteps and low voices as the crowd slowly returned to shopping. Yet something had changed in the air. The tension that had once clung to this place was gone, replaced by quiet respect. Keanu looked around at the faces of ordinary people who had come expecting to buy groceries, but instead witnessed something rare: humility and forgiveness. He turned toward Malik. "Why don't you pay for the jod? Bread?" Malik nodded and stepped up to the same register as before. The cashier, Laura, gave him a kind smile. "It's good to see you again, sweetheart," she said warmly. "And this time, the bread's on the house." Malik shook his head. "No, ma'am, I can pay. I brought money." Keanu smiled as the boy handed over his few dollars, his hands steady and confident. The cashier accepted it quietly, ringing up the purchase. Malik took the small paper bag, holding it close like a symbol of everything he'd regained: dignity, confidence, and peace. Rick, still standing nearby, cleared his throat again. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said, Mr. Reeves," he said carefully. "About fear. You were right. I let fear control how I saw people. I don't want to be that man anymore." Keanu looked at him with calm sincerity. "Then don't be. Every day gives you a chance to start again. It's not about pretending the mistake never happened, it's about growing from it." Rick nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." Keanu glanced around, noticing a few customers who had gathered closer to listen. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried easily. "Dignity," he said, "is something we all deserve, not something you earn by looking a certain way." The sentence hung in the air, soft but powerful. Even the quietest shoppers paused for a moment, letting it sink in. An older woman near the fruit section whispered, "That's the truth." Mr. Peterson stepped forward again. "I've decided to do more than just talk about change," he said. "Starting this week, our store will partner with the Safe Youth Center. We'll donate supplies, food, and part of our profits every month. If one mistake can start this much conversation, maybe it can start some good too." Keanu nodded approvingly. "That's how progress begins, with ownership and action." Malik looked up at him, eyes wide. "So the store will help the center?" Mr. Peterson smiled. "Yes, young man. Thanks to you, a lot of kids will." Keanu rested a hand on Malik's shoulder. "You see, even something painful can grow into something good." As they left the store, the afternoon light hit them squarely. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Outside, Keanu looked down at the boy beside him. "How do you feel?" Malik smiled, clutching the bread bag. "Lighter, like something heavy's gone." Keanu nodded. "That's forgiveness. It doesn't erase the past, it frees you from it." They walked down the street together, the sun setting behind them, and for the first time since that awful day, Malik felt truly safe again. 2 weeks after the visit to the store, the world began to take notice again. What had started as a viral clip was turning into something deeper. News outlets had moved on to other stories, but one reporter from the Los Angeles Times wasn't ready to let this one fade away. Her name was Samantha Lee, a thoughtful journalist known for covering stories about compassion and community. She called Keanu's assistant, politely asking for an interview. Her email read, "This isn't about celebrity. It's about a boy, a mother, and the quiet courage that reminded the world of its heart." Keanu read the message himself and sighed. "It's not my story," he said to his assistant. "It's Malik's." That night, Keanu stopped by Tanya's apartment to bring some groceries. Malik was finishing a drawing at the table this time of the youth center, surrounded by smiling kids. Tanya handed Keanu a cup of tea and sat down with a grateful smile. "He's been doing better," she said softly. "Sleeping more, smiling again." "That's good," Keanu said. "He deserves that peace." Tanya hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "Someone from the Los Angeles Times called. They want to write about what happened. They said they reached out to you too." Keanu nodded. "I told them no." She tilted her head. "Why?" He shrugged slightly. "Because stories like this get twisted. They focus on the actor instead of the message. The whole point of that day was about seeing Malik, not me. Tanya looked down at her tea, thinking, I understand. But maybe sharing it could help other kids like him. You don't know how many parents wrote to me after seeing the video. Some said their kids went through the same thing. They just didn't have anyone to stand up for them. Keanu was quiet for a moment. And you think this could make a difference? I do, she said firmly. If people read about Malik, maybe they'll think twice before judging someone else's child. He nodded slowly, the conviction in her voice moving him. Then we'll do it, he said at last. But only one condition: the story has to focus on Malik. I don't want my name in the headline. Tanya smiled. That's exactly why it should be told. The next morning, Samantha arrived at the apartment. She was kind, soft-spoken, and respectful, carrying only a small notebook and recorder. Malik sat nervously on the couch beside his mother, his hands folded tightly. Keanu stayed in the corner, quiet but present. Samantha smiled warmly. Malik, I've seen your drawings. They're incredible. Can I ask what inspires you? Malik hesitated, then said, Drawing helps me remember good things. When I draw something kind, it feels like it stays longer. Samantha smiled. That's beautiful. She looked at Tanya. And how are you feeling through all this? Tanya glanced at her son, her voice soft, proud and grateful, but also hopeful that people don't just watch, they change. A few days later, the article appeared both in print and online. The headline read, A Boy, a Loaf of Bread, and a Lesson in Humanity. Beneath it was a picture of Malik sitting at his small kitchen table, sketchbook open, his pencil midair. The photograph captured something genuine, the quiet strength of a child who had learned that courage doesn't always shout. The story began not with Keanu's name, but with Malik's. It described the moment in the store, the misunderstanding, and how a single act of kindness had reshaped an entire community. Samantha wrote about Tanya's struggle to raise her son after losing her husband, about Malik's talent for art, and about how he had turned pain into something powerful. One line read, When asked what he learned from that day, Malik said, Sometimes people just need someone to remind them what fairness looks like. The article spread quickly. Within hours, it was shared across the nation. Teachers used it in classrooms to discuss empathy and race. Church groups printed copies for Sunday discussions. Parents sent the link to their friends with messages like, This made me cry. Read this with your kids. Donations began pouring in, not to Keanu, but to Malik's school and the Safe Youth Center. Local companies sent art supplies, sketch pads, and books. A nonprofit in Chicago offered to sponsor new community workshops inspired by Malik's story. The kindness that started in one small Los Angeles store began rippling across cities. At Tanya's apartment, the mail became a flood. Every day, envelopes piled up letters from strangers across America. Some wrote simple notes, Your story gave me hope. Others were long handwritten letters from parents sharing their own experiences. One father wrote, My son was treated unfairly once too, and I stayed silent. Reading about Malik reminded me that silence helps no one. Tanya would sit on the couch in the evenings, reading them aloud, while Malik listened. Sometimes she laughed softly at people's words. Sometimes she cried quietly. Look at this one, she told Malik one night. A family from Boston sent a check for your school's art program. They said they want more kids to have what you have. Malik smiled. I just drew a picture, he said shyly. Keanu, who stopped by often, smiled too. You did more than that. You reminded people they can still feel something real. Samantha sent one final message after the article's success. Thank you for trusting me with your story. It reminded me why I started writing in the first place. Keanu read it quietly and replied, Thank you for seeing the right person in it. That night, Malik sat at his table again, surrounded by letters and drawings from children around the country. He opened his sketchbook to a blank page and began drawing a loaf of bread resting in open hands. Underneath, he wrote the same words from the article's title, A Lesson in Humanity. For the first time in a long while, Tanya's small apartment didn't feel crowded or broken. It felt full of warmth, hope, and connection, all because one small act of courage had reminded the world what kindness looks like when it's lived, not just spoken. The City Hall building glowed softly under the afternoon light. Inside, Keanu sat across a long wooden table surrounded by several city officials. They had gathered to discuss something that had grown out of Malik's story, not another headline, but a movement. A whiteboard behind them displayed the words, "Safe Youth Initiative." A council member, Miss Henderson, leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves, your idea has potential. You're proposing a private-public partnership that funds education, mentorship, and bias training for both youth and adults. But tell us, what made you start this?" Keanu paused before answering. "A boy named Malik," he said simply. "He walked into a store to buy bread for his sick mother. He was stopped because of how he looked. I stepped in, but it was his courage that changed everything. I realized that one moment shouldn't just make people talk. It should make people act." The room grew still. Henderson nodded. "And you're offering to fund it personally?" "Yes," Keanu replied. "I don't want my name on it. I just want it to last. The Safe Youth Fund will be the foundation. It'll pay for empathy workshops in schools, mentorship programs for underprivileged kids, and training for store owners and workers. No child should ever feel unwelcome in a public space again," another official spoke. "That's remarkable, Mr. Reeves. How much are we talking about?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Enough to make a real start." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check, $1 million, signed quietly, without fanfare. "This isn't charity," he said. "It's an investment in decency." The officials exchanged glances of surprise and admiration. Miss Henderson stood and shook his hand firmly. "On behalf of the city, thank you. This will change lives." A week later, preparations began for the official launch of the Safe Youth Fund. The event was modest, but full of meaning. It was held at the same community center where Malik had drawn his first picture of safety and belonging. The walls were now decorated with children's art from across the city, images of unity, kindness, and hope. Malik and his mother arrived early. Tanya wore her best dress, simple but elegant, her eyes bright with pride. Malik clutched a small note card in his pocket, his fingers trembling as he rehearsed what he might say. "I don't think I can do this," he whispered. "You can," Tanya said softly. "You've already done harder things." As the seats filled, Keanu stood near the back, speaking with Lila, the director of the youth center. "You really did it," she said with a proud smile. "You turned one act of kindness into a movement." Keanu shook his head gently. "It wasn't me. It was a boy who reminded us what humanity looks like." When Malik saw him, his face lit up. "Mr. Reeves, are you sure I have to talk?" Keanu smiled. "You don't have to, but I think people would like to hear the truth straight from the boy who started it all." The event began with quiet music and the soft buzz of conversation. Local teachers, youth advocates, and parents filled the seats, while cameras from small community outlets recorded the moment. On the stage stood a banner with painted handprints of children in every color. Above the words, "Safe Youth Fund for Every Child's Dignity." When Keanu walked up to the podium, the room grew still. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple dark shirt and jeans. He adjusted the microphone, his voice steady and sincere. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "A few weeks ago, I witnessed something that reminded me how fragile kindness can be and how powerful it becomes when someone chooses it. A boy named Malik was treated unfairly for no reason other than fear. But instead of anger, he showed grace, and that grace changed hearts." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The Safe Youth Fund exists because of him, because no child should ever be made to feel they don't belong. This fund will help build programs that teach empathy, create mentorship, and protect kids from discrimination in everyday spaces. The world doesn't need more rules. It needs more understanding. A soft wave of applause filled the hall. Keanu looked toward the front row, where Malik sat between Tanya and Miss Alvarez. and I'd like to invite Malik to the stage. He's the reason we're all here today, and the first honorary member of the Safe Youth Fund." Malik froze for a moment, his heart pounding. Tanya squeezed his hand. "Go on, baby. You'll do great." He stood and walked up the steps, his small frame looking even smaller behind the podium. Keanu adjusted the microphone for him and stepped aside. Malik unfolded the note card in his hands, his voice shaky but clear. I just wanted to buy bread for my mom," he began. The room went completely silent. "That's all I wanted. But that day turned into something bigger than I ever thought it could. Mr. Reeves helped people see me, and not just me, but kids like me who just want to be treated fair." He took a small breath and smiled nervously. "My teacher told me kindness is strength. I think she's right. Because kindness is what made all this happen." The audience rose to their feet in applause. Tanya wiped her eyes as Malik looked over at Keanu, who gave him a proud nod. When the clapping faded, Keanu returned to the podium. "Sometimes," he said, his tone quiet but firm, "one small act of courage changes a whole city. That's what this fund is about. Not fame, not headlines, but the courage to do the right thing, even when no one's watching." He gestured toward Malik. This young man reminded the world what fairness looks like. "And I believe this is just the beginning." The crowd erupted again, the sound of applause echoing through the hall like a heartbeat. Malik looked out at the sea of smiling faces and whispered, "Thank you." For the first time since that day in the grocery store, he felt the full weight of what he'd started. Not fear, not shame, but something stronger: hope. Several weeks passed after the launch of the Safe Youth Fund, and the city had already begun to feel its ripple effect. Community centers were filling up again. Stores had started posting small signs that read, "All are welcome here." But the biggest change was one no one expected. On a quiet afternoon, the door to the Safe Youth Center opened, and Rick, the former security guard, stepped inside. He looked unsure of himself, dressed not in his old uniform but in a plain shirt and jeans. His hands fidgeted at his sides as he scanned the colorful room. The laughter of children echoed through the hallways, a sound that felt both comforting and intimidating. Lila, the center's director, noticed him first. "Can I help you?" she asked kindly. Rick hesitated, clearing his throat. "Yeah. My name's Rick. I used to work at Peterson's grocery. I was wondering if Mr. Reeves is around." Lila's expression softened. "He's in the back room with the kids. You can wait if you'd like." Rick nodded and took a seat near the door. He watched as a group of children painted a mural on one wall, their hands covered in blue and green paint, laughter filling the air. Every stroke of color seemed to carry the message he once ignored. He felt out of place, but somehow he couldn't bring himself to leave. Moments later, Keanu walked in, holding a box of supplies. When he saw Rick, he stopped, surprised, but not unkind. "Rick," he said, "it's been a while." Rick stood, his voice unsure. "Yeah, I didn't know if I should come." Keanu set the box down. "I'm glad you did." Rick exhaled, the tension in his shoulders visible. "I wanted to say thank you and to apologize again. Not just to Malik, but to everyone who saw that video. I can't stop thinking about it. The way I acted, it's not who I want to be." Keanu nodded, silent for a moment. "What changed?" Rick took a deep breath. "After the story spread, I got a lot of messages. Some angry, some forgiving. But one stuck with me. A man from my old neighborhood wrote, 'You weren't born afraid. Someone taught you that.' It hit me hard. I grew up around fear. I thought it kept me safe. I didn't realize it was just keeping me small." Keanu's voice softened. "Fear does that. It convinces us to see danger instead of people. But realizing it means you're ready to change." Rick nodded slowly. "That's why I came here. I want to help if you'll let me. I don't have much to offer, but I know about safety, about how people think when they're scared. Maybe I can teach others not to make the same mistake." Keanu studied him for a moment and then smiled faintly. "You're already doing that by walking through the door." Keanu motioned for Rick to follow him into the main art room. The walls were alive with color paintings of friendship, peace, and unity, all created by the kids who came to the center each week. Rick stopped when he saw a framed drawing on the far wall. It was Malik's artwork, the one that read "Safe feels like this." He walked closer, his voice almost a whisper. "He drew this, didn't he?" Keanu nodded. "Yeah, that's Malik's." Rick stared at the drawing for a long time, his jaw tightening. That day, I saw a scared kid. But he wasn't the one who should have been scared. I was. Scared of being wrong, scared of being judged, scared of facing what I didn't understand. I don't want to be that person anymore. Keanu's voice was calm. Then don't be. The best way to make peace with your past is to help others avoid the same path. Rick turned toward him. "That's why I came. I want to volunteer help with the Safety and Respect program. Teach others what not to do. Not just for the kids, but for people like me, who still carry fear they don't even see." Keanu smiled. "You mean teach through honesty, not authority?" Rick nodded slowly. "Exactly. Lila, join them, overhearing the conversation. We've actually been talking about expanding the mentorship program. Having someone who understands both sides could make a real difference." Rick blinked, surprised. "You'd really let me do that?" Keanu nodded. "You earned the chance by showing up." That afternoon, Malik arrived at the center for his weekly drawing class. When he saw Rick standing near the doorway, he froze for a second, unsure of what to do. Rick approached carefully, his hands at his sides. "Hey, Malik," he said softly. "You probably didn't expect to see me here." Malik shook his head but didn't step back. "Are you working here now?" "Trying to," Rick said. "If they'll have me. I came to help, not to hurt." He paused, then added, "I've been learning. About fear. About respect. You taught me more than you'll ever know." Malik looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Everyone can learn," he said. "That's what Mr. Reeves told me." Rick chuckled quietly, relief flooding his face. "He's a good teacher, isn't he?" Malik nodded. "The best." Keanu watched the exchange from a few feet away, his expression proud but humble. He didn't interrupt. Some lessons didn't need his words. Over the next few weeks, Rick became a steady presence at the center. He helped run safety discussions for teens, explaining how quick judgments could cause harm. He listened more than he spoke, always honest about his mistakes. The kids respected that. They didn't see a guard anymore. They saw a man trying to make things right. One afternoon, Keanu walked past the art room and stopped at the doorway. Malik sat beside a younger boy, showing him how to shade a drawing with the side of a pencil. "See?" Malik said, smiling patiently. "It's not about drawing perfect lines. It's about seeing what's really there." Rick was watching too, quietly sweeping the floor near the back. Keanu caught his eye, and the two men shared a knowing nod, a silent understanding that redemption had truly taken root. As the sun streamed through the window, the room felt full of light and laughter. Keanu looked around at the children painting, learning, and forgiving. The cycle had begun again. Kindness, teaching kindness, one heart at a time. No one said it out loud, but everyone could feel it. Something broken had been healed. Months passed, but the ripples of Malik's story continued to spread far beyond Los Angeles. What began as one small act of compassion in a neighborhood grocery store had turned into something much larger. Across the country, schools, youth centers, and community programs began adopting the same message of empathy that inspired the Safe Youth Fund. In Chicago, a local high school launched a pilot program called Kindness First, modeled after the Safe Youth Center's workshops. Teachers there used real-life scenarios to teach students how to respond to bias and exclusion. In Dallas, police officers volunteered to speak with students about trust and understanding. And in Detroit, a group of teenagers painted a mural downtown, a huge portrait of children holding hands beneath the words, "Safe feels like this." Each time Keanu heard about a new city joining in, He smiled quietly but refused interviews. He wanted the movement to belong to the people, not to him. Whenever journalists tried to center the story on his fame, he politely redirected them. "I'm not leading a movement," he said once during a brief encounter with a reporter outside a youth center. "I'm just following kindness where it takes me." He meant it. In every photo that appeared online, he was never standing in front and always beside others, listening, shaking hands, or crouching down to talk to kids eye to eye. Parents often spoke later about how humble he was, how he stayed long after the cameras left, helping stack chairs or clean up after community events. One Saturday in New York, a group of children gathered in a small gym where a new Safe Youth chapter was opening. Keanu attended quietly, sitting near the back with Malik and Tanya. As the event began, a teacher unveiled the program's new logo, a stylized drawing of a child holding a loaf of bread and a glowing light. Malik's eyes widened in surprise. "That's mine," he whispered. Tanya squeezed his hand, tears forming. "They used your drawing, baby. It's the symbol now." Lila, who had flown in from Los Angeles for the event, stepped up to the microphone and said, "This image came from a boy who taught us that courage can look gentle. Malik's drawing will represent every center we open. A reminder that kindness and safety belong to every child." The crowd applauded. Malik looked down, embarrassed, but happy. Keanu leaned over and said quietly, "You see what one small picture can do?" Malik smiled shyly. "I didn't think anyone would remember it." "They'll remember," Keanu said. "Because you drew what everyone feels but doesn't always know how to say." As the applause continued, banners with the new logo were raised around the room. Children clapped and cheered, not realizing they were part of something historic, a growing movement built not on anger, but on hope. The Safe Youth movement kept spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. What started in Los Angeles had now reached communities across the nation. News outlets began calling it the Quiet Revolution because it wasn't led by speeches or protests. It was built on everyday acts of respect and humanity. In Chicago, a grocery store chain created a new policy requiring all employees to attend empathy training inspired by Malik's story. In Dallas, middle school students performed a short play titled "The Bread That Changed the World." In Detroit, volunteers turned an abandoned building into a youth art center, naming it the Lighthouse after the glowing lamp in Malik's drawing. Everywhere the Safe Youth logo appeared, it carried the same message: see the child, not the fear. Keanu continued traveling quietly to different cities, visiting new centers and programs. He never announced his visits or stood on stages. Parents would only find out later that a kind man who looked like Keanu Reeves had stopped by to talk to their kids, shake hands, or help repaint a classroom wall. One afternoon in Atlanta, he walked into a small gym where a group of teens were learning about communication and respect. The instructor, unaware of who he was, handed him a volunteer badge and asked him to help hand out flyers. Keanu smiled and did exactly that. When someone finally recognized him, he simply laughed and said, "I work best when nobody notices." At the end of that session, one of the teens asked, "Why do you care so much about this, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu paused, then said softly, "Because I've seen what happens when fear wins. And I've seen how everything changes when kindness does." The answer spread online after one of the teachers shared it, and once again the story caught fire, but not as a celebrity headline. This time, it was a reminder that kindness could become policy, empathy could become culture, and change could be quiet yet unstoppable. Back in Los Angeles, the original Safe Youth Center had grown. New staff joined, new art covered the walls, and children from all backgrounds worked together on community projects. Rick's safety classes had become one of the most popular programs. Malik now volunteered every Saturday, helping younger kids learn how to draw and express their feelings through art. One evening, Keanu visited again. He walked through the familiar halls, stopping to admire the framed artwork that now included paintings from kids across the country. He stopped in front of Malik's drawing, the child holding a loaf of bread and a light, now the symbol seen nationwide. Beneath it, someone had added a small brass plaque that read, "Kindness is strength." Lila approached from behind. "You know, we've had people come from 5 states just to see this drawing," she said proudly. Keanu smiled. "It's funny, isn't it? A boy walks into a store for bread, and somehow he ends up feeding hearts across the country." She nodded. "It's more than a story now. It's a reminder." As the evening sun poured through the window, Malik entered the room carrying his sketchbook. He waved at Keanu and said, "Hey, Mr. Reeves, I've been working on something new." Keanu crouched beside him, smiling. "Show me." Malik opened the book to reveal a new drawing, children of every color holding a single candle together, its flame bright enough to light the whole page. Underneath it, in neat handwriting, he'd written, "The light keeps growing." Keanu's eyes softened. "You're right, Malik. It does." Late one evening, long after the noise of the day had faded, Keanu sat alone in his quiet home. The glow from a single lamp filled the room, casting long shadows on the walls. On his desk lay a newspaper clipping, the Los Angeles Times article about Malik. The headline, "A boy, a loaf of bread, and a lesson in humanity," had begun to yellow at the edges. He traced the headline with his finger, lost in thought. The boy's courage, his innocence, his unshaken kindness. It all reminded Keanu of something buried deep in his past. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the city lights beyond. Somewhere out there, Malik was probably asleep, unaware that his small act of bravery had awakened something in another soul. For the first time in weeks, Keanu allowed himself to think about his own childhood, the nights of silence, the feelings of being unseen, the ache of growing up with pieces missing. When his father left, he remembered that same hollow loneliness Malik must have felt walking into that store alone. He remembered being a boy who didn't know where he belonged, who tried to find meaning through kindness because it was the only thing that ever made sense. He reached for a small notepad and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then more easily, flowing from someplace honest and unguarded. "Dear Malik, I wanted to tell you something I didn't say that day. When I helped you, I was also helping the boy. I once was a boy who felt invisible and needed someone to see him. You reminded me why I try to be kind, because kindness heals in both directions. You showed courage when you forgave. That's the hardest kind of strength to find. You may not realize it yet, but you've already become a light for others, and for me too. Keep drawing. Keep believing. The world needs more people like you, Keanu." He folded the note carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote Malik's name on it in simple block letters. The next morning, before the world was awake, he drove across the city and left the envelope at the youth center, tucked beneath Malik's sketchbook on the art table. A few hours later, Malik found it. He read the note silently, his heart thudding as the words sank in. His eyes stung, but he smiled through it. The line that stayed with him most was the one that said, "Kindness heals in both directions." He folded the letter and placed it inside the front cover of his sketchbook, vowing to never lose it. That afternoon, he showed it to his mother. Tanya sat quietly, reading it twice before speaking. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes the people who help us are really helping themselves too." Malik looked up. "What do you mean?" She smiled gently. "You gave him something he didn't know he needed." A week later, the letter still lives safely in Malik's sketchbook, folded between pages filled with new drawings. Every time he opened it, he reread those same lines. "When I helped you, I was also helping the boy I once was." The words meant more to him than he could explain. It made him see Keanu not as a movie star or a hero, but as a person who had once been lonely too, who had carried his own kind of quiet pain. One afternoon, Malik sat at the kitchen table while Tanya hung a new frame on the wall. She stood on a chair, adjusting it carefully until it was perfectly straight. When Malik looked up, he saw it, the drawing he had made of Keanu at the store. In the picture, Keanu stood between Malik and the guard, not angry, but steady, his presence calm and protective. Tanya stepped down from the chair and smiled. "What do you think?" "It looks good," Malik said softly. She wiped her hands on a towel and looked at the drawing for a long moment. "You know, I've been thinking about that day a lot," she said. At first, I only saw the hurt in it, but now I see the lesson. Goodness has a ripple effect, baby. You started something bigger than you know." Malik tilted his head. "Me? Yes, you," she said. "You could have been angry. You could have shouted or given up. But you stayed kind. That's why it reached so far." People don't remember anger the way they remember kindness. He thought about it quietly, glancing at the framed drawing again. The idea that his actions, something so simple, so small, could have changed other people's hearts, felt almost too big to believe. But deep down, he knew it was true. Later that evening, he sat by the window sketching again. This time, he drew something different, two figures side by side. One was him, small and young, clutching a loaf of bread. The other was Keanu, older, smiling gently, a hand resting on his shoulder. Between them was a beam of light stretching outward, reaching beyond the page. He titled it, "Healing Both Ways." When Tanya came to check on him, she leaned over his shoulder and smiled. "That's beautiful," she said. Malik nodded. "It's how it feels. Like we helped each other." "You did," she said. "And that's what the world needs, people helping each other in ways they don't even realize." The next day, Malik brought the framed drawing of Keanu and himself to the youth center. Lila found a spot for it right beside his famous piece, the one that had become the movement's logo. Beneath it, she placed a small card with words Malik chose himself. "Kindness doesn't end with one act, it passes on, like light." That evening, when Keanu visited the center again, he saw the new frame. He stood before it quietly, reading the inscription, his eyes soft with gratitude. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he smiled and whispered to himself, "He understands." A year passed since the day a boy had walked into a grocery store just to buy bread for his mother. The seasons had changed, but the echoes of that moment continued to ripple through lives and cities far beyond Los Angeles. The SAFE youth movement was now active in more than a dozen states. Malik's drawing had become a national symbol, and his story was still told in classrooms as an example of quiet courage. But for Malik, life had returned to something wonderfully normal. He was now 13, a little taller, his voice a little deeper, his confidence brighter than before. He had spent the past year drawing, painting, and helping younger kids at the youth center, and today was a big day, his school's annual art fair. The gym buzzed with excitement. Tables lined the walls, each covered in colorful projects from students across every grade. Malik stood near the back of the stage, holding his project board in both hands. It was titled "Different Colors, Same Heart." On it were sketches, paintings, and collages he had made. Over the past few months, portraits of people of all races and backgrounds, all drawn with one thing in common. Each figure had a small, glowing heart in the center of their chest. Tanya stood in the audience near the front, her smile warm and steady. She had fully recovered from her illness and was working again part-time at the library. Her eyes glistened with pride as she waved to her son, mouthing, "You got this." The principal, Mr. Hall, stepped to the microphone. "And now," he said, "we come to the final presentation of the evening, one that reminds us how art can change the way we see the world. Please welcome Malik Johnson." Applause filled the room as Malik stepped forward. He looked out at the sea of faces, classmates, teachers, parents, and felt his stomach flutter. But then he spotted Miss Alvarez near the back, smiling proudly. Just seeing her gave him the courage to begin. "My project," he said softly, "is called Different Colors, Same Heart. I made it because this year I learned that kindness doesn't have a color. It doesn't have a language. It's something that lives inside all of us. Sometimes people forget that, but I wanted to draw it so nobody could." A hush fell over the crowd. He continued, "Every person I drew has a heart that glows, because when we see each other with kindness, that light grows stronger. I think the world needs more people who help each other shine." There was a long, emotional silence before the room erupted into applause. Some people stood, clapping until their hands hurt. Tanya wiped a tear from her cheek. Even Mr. Hall had to clear his throat before speaking again. "That," he said with a smile, "is what art is meant to do." Malik smiled shyly and stepped back. But as he turned his head, something caught his eye. A familiar face in the back row, standing quietly near the door. It took Malik a second to believe what he was seeing. Standing near the back, half hidden behind a group of parents, was Keanu Reeves. He was dressed simply, as always, a dark jacket, jeans, and that same calm smile that had changed Malik's world a year ago. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. He didn't need to. Malik froze for a moment, his heart racing. Then Keanu lifted a hand and gave a small wave, as if to say, "Keep going." The ceremony continued. Judges walked the aisles, examining the art displays. When they reached Malik's project, they paused for a long time, whispering among themselves. A few minutes later, the principal returned to the microphone. "And the first place award for Outstanding Artistic Expression goes to Malik Johnson for Different Colors, Same Heart." The audience cheered. Tanya covered her mouth, overcome with pride. "Miss?" Alvarez clapped until her palms turned red. Malik stepped forward to accept his ribbon and certificate, his face glowing with disbelief and joy. The principal handed him the microphone again and said, "Would you like to say a few words?" Malik nodded nervously. He looked down at the paper in his hands, then out at the crowd. His voice trembled at first, but soon steadied. "This award means a lot to me, but I don't want it to be just about me. I want to dedicate it to everyone who ever felt unwelcome, everyone who's been judged before people even knew their heart." He took a breath. "A long time ago, I just wanted to buy bread for my mom. But something happened that day that made me see the world differently. Someone stood up for me, and because of that, I got to stand up for others." The audience rose to their feet, clapping again not just for the art, but for the message behind it. Keanu stayed in the back, smiling quietly. He didn't want attention, he just wanted to witness the moment that belonged entirely to the boy. After the ceremony ended, Malik made his way through the crowd, weaving past students and teachers until he reached Keanu by the doors. They stood there for a second, neither saying anything. Then Malik smiled. "You came." "I wouldn't miss it," Keanu said, his eyes warm. "You were amazing up there." Malik looked down, holding his ribbon tightly. "You changed my life." Keanu shook his head gently. "No, Malik, you changed mine." They stepped outside together, the evening air soft and cool. The sky above the school glowed faintly with the last light of sunset. For a while, they didn't speak. They just stood side by side, watching the colors fade into night. Finally, Keanu said quietly, "You know what I think?" Malik turned to him. "What?" "I think the world needs more boys like you, people who remind the rest of us how to be human." Malik smiled, his heart full. "Then I'll keep drawing, so they don't forget." Keanu nodded. "Good. Because kindness, Malik, it's the only thing worth keeping alive." They shook hands under the evening sky. Two souls forever connected by a simple act of courage that had grown into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. It was a quiet afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind that carried a soft, golden warmth through the streets. Keanu parked a few blocks away from a familiar corner, a place he hadn't visited in almost a year. As he walked toward the grocery store, he noticed that everything looked both the same and completely different. The cracked sidewalk was still there. The same old neon sign flickered above the entrance, but the air felt lighter, as if the building itself had healed. Where there had once been blank gray concrete, there was now color-bright, vivid color stretching across the entire side wall of the store. It was a mural, enormous and alive with meaning. The painting showed people of all races, ages, and backgrounds standing together hand in hand. At the center was a child holding a loaf of bread in one arm and a shining light in the other, the same image that had become the logo for the Safe Youth movement. Around the child, painted words curved across the top of the mural in bold letters, different colors, same heart. Keanu stopped several feet away, simply taking it in. The image looked like it belonged there, as if the wall had always been waiting for this story to live on it. He stepped closer, and that's when he noticed a man standing on a ladder near the far edge of the mural, painting the final touches along the border. The man turned, wiping sweat from his forehead. It was Rick. Their eyes met, and a small smile crossed Rick's face. "Didn't expect to see you today," he said, climbing down from the ladder. Keanu smiled back. "Didn't expect to find this here." Rick nodded toward the mural. "Malik designed it, said the world needed to see the ending. I just helped get it on the wall." Keanu looked up again, admiration filling his eyes. "He did more than that. He made sure no one forgets what we learned." Rick leaned on the handle of his paint roller, gazing at the wall. "Funny thing," he said softly, "this spot used to make me feel ashamed every time I passed it. Now it feels like a second chance." Keanu turned to him. "That's what growth feels like, Rick. It doesn't erase what happened, it transforms it." Rick nodded slowly. "The neighborhood kids stop by all the time now. They ask about the story behind it. I tell them everything, the mistake, the lesson, the forgiveness. They listen. And maybe that helps them see the world differently too." Keanu placed a hand on Rick's shoulder. "You're doing good work here." Rick gave a small, grateful smile. "Feels right. I can't change the past, but I can make the wall brighter." They both stood in silence for a moment, the warm afternoon breeze carrying the faint smell of paint and fresh bread from inside the store. Keanu looked at the mural again, eyes tracing the faces Malik had imagined, faces that now belonged to everyone. Keanu took another slow step toward the wall, until he was close enough to touch it. The colors seemed to glow in the sunlight, the reds, blues, and golds blending in a harmony that felt alive. He reached out, resting his hand gently on the painted surface. The warmth of the wall against his palm made it feel almost like it was breathing. Rick stood beside him, wiping paint off his hands with a rag. "It's strange," he said quietly. "When I first started working here again, I didn't think people would want me around. But Malik came by the first day with his mom, handed me a sandwich, and said, 'We all start over somewhere.'" Keanu smiled faintly. "Sounds like him," Rick chuckled. "That kid's got more wisdom than most adults I know. I owe him more than he'll ever realize." Keanu nodded. "We all do." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The traffic hummed softly in the background, and a group of neighborhood children passed by on bicycles, pointing at the mural as they rode. One of them shouted, "That's the hero wall," before disappearing down the block. Rick smiled. "You know, people stop here every day just to look. They say it makes them feel calm. I think that's the best kind of redemption there is, when a place that once hurt becomes a place that heals." Keanu nodded again, his eyes tracing the child at the center of the mural. "This started with bread," he said softly, almost to himself. "But what we built was trust." Rick glanced over. "You're right about that. And trust doesn't fade. It just needs a chance to grow." Keanu turned toward the store entrance, where the familiar sound of the doorbell chimed as a customer walked in. Through the window, he could see Mr. Peterson arranging fruit on the display, laughing with a woman from the neighborhood. The store that once divided people had become a gathering place again, bright, welcoming, and human. When he stepped outside a few minutes later, the sunlight had deepened, painting the mural in gold. Malik and Tanya were arriving from the youth center, Malik holding a small box of new chalks. When he spotted Keanu and Rick, he ran over. "Mr. Reeves, you came." "I couldn't miss it," Keanu said, smiling. "Looks like your drawing grew up." Malik looked up at the wall, eyes wide with pride. "It's like it's telling the story without needing words." "It is," Keanu said, "and it's still teaching us." Rick smiled at the boy. "You were right, Malik. Everyone can learn." Malik handed him a piece of chalk. "Then you get to sign it too." Rick hesitated, then bent down and carefully wrote his name in small letters at the bottom corner. Beside it, Keanu added his initials, then handed the chalk to Malik. The boy thought for a moment and wrote one word under them both, "Together." They all stepped back and looked at the wall, glowing in the afternoon light. It wasn't just a mural anymore. It was a promise that what began in pain had ended in unity, and that kindness, once planted, never stopped growing. The afternoon sun began to sink behind the Los Angeles skyline, washing the city in soft amber light. The mural at the grocery store glowed gently, as if the painted child's light were real, reaching out to the people passing by. Keanu stood across the street, watching as a group of students stopped to take pictures. One of them read the words, "Different colors, same heart," aloud and smiled. For him, that was enough. His voice came quietly, reflective and steady. "No one should ever be made to feel less because of the color of their skin," he said. "And no act of kindness should ever go unnoticed. What we see in others or what we choose to see defines who we are." The memory of Malik's trembling hands clutching that loaf of bread came back to him. He could still hear the fear in the boy's voice that day, and the way it transformed into courage. He thought of Tanya's strength, Rick's redemption, and all the small ripples that had become waves of change. "When I first stepped forward that day," he continued softly, "I wasn't thinking about the world. I was thinking about one scared boy. But what I've learned since then is that every time we choose compassion, we help heal more than just one heart. We help heal our world." Keanu turned his eyes toward the mural again, watching as Malik and his friends finished chalking colorful hearts along the sidewalk. Each one carried a child's handwriting, simple words like hope, love, and respect. Their laughter echoed against the buildings, and for a moment, the world felt exactly as it should be. "This story," he said, "was never really about fame or recognition. It was about a reminder that in a divided world, empathy still bridges the distance between us. It's easy to judge. It's harder to listen. But when we choose to listen, we see the person, not the label." The camera moved slowly across the mural. The painted faces of all races, the sective, clasped hands, the bright light at its center. Keanu's voice softened further. "To everyone watching this, if you believe in giving every child safety and respect, share this story. Let it travel. Let it start conversations in homes, schools, and workplaces. Change doesn't begin with speeches, it begins with a simple choice to care." He looked out over the street one last time. A little girl tugged her mother's hand, pointing to the wall and saying, "That's the kind of world I want to live in." Keanu smiled. "That's what it's all about," he said quietly. "Building a world where kindness is the rule, not the exception." The sun dipped lower, the mural glowing brighter under the last stretch of golden light. The sound of laughter lingered, carried by the wind, blending with the heartbeat of the city that had learned, at least in one corner, how to see again. Keanu stayed for a while longer, leaning against a lamppost as the streetlights flickered on one by one. He could hear distant music from a passing car and the quiet chatter of people walking home. The mural's glow reflected off the windows of nearby buildings, as if the whole neighborhood were touched by its warmth. He watched as Rick locked up the store for the night, waving goodbye to Malik and Tanya as they headed down the street. Malik's laughter carried through the air, light, free, and full of the innocence that had once been taken from him but had now returned tenfold. Keanu smiled to himself. "That sound," he whispered. "That's what peace feels like." He thought about how far they had all come. A single act, one small moment, had become a lifeline connecting strangers who might never have crossed paths otherwise. A frightened boy had become a leader. A remorseful man had become a mentor. A grieving mother had found new purpose. And a city once divided by misunderstanding had found a symbol of unity painted on an old grocery wall. Keanu's voice returned, calm, but full of conviction. "The truth is, we all have moments that test who we are. We all stand at the edge between silence and courage, comfort and compassion. The question is, what do we do in those moments? Do we look away or do we step forward?" He paused for a moment, the sound of passing cars fading into stillness. Because when you stand up for someone, even once, you're not just protecting them. You're reminding the world that humanity still matters. And that's something worth protecting every single day. The camera followed him as he began walking toward the mural. The painted child's light shone softly under the street lamp, illuminating the faces of those who stopped to look. Keanu reached out again, placing his hand against the wall as he had done earlier. the paint cool under his palm. He spoke gently, almost as if to the mural itself. What happened here wasn't about a celebrity or a headline. It was about decency, the simple kind that doesn't ask for reward. We don't have to fix the whole world at once. We just have to start by being kind where we are. His words lingered as the screen slowly began to fade to the mural now fully lit under the streetlights, colors dancing in the glow. "If you believe in giving every child safety and respect," Keanu said, his voice soft but firm, "share this story. Tell it to your friends, your family, your children. Because stories like this remind us that change begins not with power, but with compassion. And maybe, if enough of us choose to care, the world will remember how to be kind again." The music swelled gently, soft piano, and strings rising like a heartbeat. The camera slowly panned upward, capturing the mural's message one last time. Different colors, same heart. Keanu's closing words followed as the screen faded to light. "Let's build a world where kindness is the rule, not the exception." After a moment of stillness, the video transitioned to its final frame, white text appearing against a black background. "Have you ever witnessed someone stand up against injustice? What did it teach you?" What story should we tell next about Keanu Reeves's acts of kindness? The screen lingered there, quiet and hopeful, before the music faded out, leaving only the echo of Keanu's message in the hearts of everyone who listened.